In the last episode of Talking History, we told you about the story of how these remote and untouched islands were established into an infamous penal colony by the British after 1857 revolt. After establishing the first ever jail in the Viper Islands, the British moved the penal settlement in Port Blair and commissioned the construction of the cellular jail.
The model for cellular jail has come from the Pentonville prison in London. They were, of course, sending them to colonies was basically for economic reasons, very cheap to maintain, and the infrastructure will be developed without much cost. And later on you can develop into a beautiful city or a place where they can settle other kinds of people, like you have seen in Australia.
ये सेलुलर जेल बनाने का ध्यान उनको तभी आया जब 1890 में एक जेल कमेटी ने अंडमान विज़िट किया और फिर उनके सिफारिश पर 1893 से सेलुलर जेल का काम शुरू हुआ यहाँ पर.
Similar jails exist in many of the British colonies all over the world. In fact, there are similar jails in India itself. I visited Rajahmundry Central Jail, which is exactly like the cellular jail. It was built much earlier. And I have seen old Melbourne jail in Melbourne, which is exactly the same as the cellular jail.
जेल जैसे जैसी कोठरियाँ एक जैसे मान लीजिए इसके 7 भुजाएं हुआ करती थी उस ज़माने में, तो 7 एक भुजा अगर कंप्लीट हुई, एक ब्लॉक कंप्लीट हुआ तो उसमें जितनी कोठरियाँ उनके पास अवेलेबल थी तो उसमें उन्होंने फ्रीडम फाइटर्स को और बाकी कॉन्विक्ट्स को रखना शुरू किया.
This structure was in years to become one of the darkest chapters of the colonial rule, a bastion of untold torture and agony. The jail was also a telling tale of instruments of torture used against the patriots, from flogging chained inmates on this triangular frame to backbreaking forced labor at oil mills, to coy pounding and even flattening the hills. Each space in these islands speaks about the endless torture.
They wanted to make a jail in such a pattern so that these convicts in each cell cannot have communication to each other. Okay, now when they are in the work shed, there they have guards, they have tundales and supervision is there. But when they are in the cell, it is very difficult to control them. So it was decided to construct the jail in such a manner that each wing have the back facing the front of the other one, and the cells were such that they cannot be opened from inside and they cannot talk to each other next to each other also.
The oil mill is a very you can say horrifying torture instrument. When the prisoner is yoked to it and made to go round and round like a bullock, within a short time he will become dizzy and collapse. So that is a very common instrument. There's nothing fictionalized about it. Flogging is very common. I have seen the same kind of flogging stand in Melbourne jail also. But the pity is flogging was stopped in most of the jails, whereas it was continued in cellular jail till it was closed down.
सेलुलर जेल की काल कोठरियाँ और इनकी दीवारें बहुत कुछ बोलती है, बहुत कुछ, बहुत दर्द, बहुत व्यथा, बहुत कुछ अभी भी इसकी कहानी को लिखना बाकी भी है और बहुत कुछ लिखा भी गया, बहुत कुछ लिखना बाकी है. अगर आप सच जानो तो फ्रीडम फाइटर्स ने जो ऑटोबायोग्राफीज लिखी है, अपनी आत्मकथाएं लिखी है, उनको पढ़िए.
Even as Port Blair was sinking deep in its infamy, a small island just 3 kilometers away from it was getting studded with motifs of quality life, pomp and splendor, the Ross Island. Renamed as Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Island in December 2018, the islands were administrative headquarters of the British. It was a place where convicts were held before they were transported to Chatham or Viper and later to the cellular jail.
Now, Ross Island was occupied by the first jail superintendent, Dr. James Pettison Walker. Because the idea was to occupy Chatham Island, which was selected by Archibald Blair, the marine surveyor. But when they land there, they find that there's some sort of problem because the island is small, shortage of water and all that. So he decides to occupy Ross Island, which is there at the mouth of the harbor. The entire Port Blair harbor is protected by that island. And they start clearing the jungle. And then he decides that this is the island that should be developed as the administrative headquarters of the British.
Ross Island was the place where the British moved in after, bringing the convicts to Chatham first. They developed it as a small place for holding the convicts before Viper Island became a proper jail. And then they slowly developed it as their headquarters. And at the heart of this is the Chief Commissioner's bungalow. The Chief Commissioner lived on Ross Island. And along with him, all the other people according to their rank.
First named after the British marine surveyor Daniel Ross, the island slowly flourished and got an informal status as that of the Paris of the East.
Well, these are the ruins of the empire. Not just this church at the Ross Island, but several other installations are reflective of what the culture used to be here. The British and their subordinates had everything for their enjoyment and leisure here. Besides church and cemetery, there were courts, there were clubs, cricket ground, private beaches, bakeries, shops. While our people, the freedom fighters, atrocities were laid on them across the seas in cellular jail, the Britishers and the subordinate, they enjoyed. They just enjoyed here.
In ruins, the islands once had a bustling bazaar, a post and telegraph office, water treatment plant, church, cemetery, tennis court, secretariat, hospital, swimming pool, and even a printing press. The Chief Commissioner of Port Blair too resided here in a massive mansion with its huge gardens and staid grand ballrooms. Today, in a dilapidated condition, these ruins stand as a reminiscent of the old British regime.
So Ross Island developed as a very safe haven where the British had all their comforts, all the things they need with protection. All the convict laborers were brought to Ross Island in the morning by boats from Aberdeen, and by evening they all have to go out. Only the officers stayed there. They had the club, they had the dance floor, they had the hospital. Hospital was for other patients also who could be taken from Aberdeen. They had the church, and they had dances in the evening. Every Saturday night there was dance, there were festivals, There was Sunday service. They had the ice factory so that they can have ice. They had the generators so that they can have electricity.
We all know that it was known as the Paris of the East because it had all facilities. Because the islands were so isolated, the Britishers wanted that those officers who are posted here in Andamans, they should not feel isolated, or so they wanted to provide them all facilities, the medical, the hospital, the grass court, hard court, tennis court I'm talking about. It had about 3-4 tennis courts, 2 churches for Protestants and the Catholics probably. Then it had a temple also. It had a temple, and the funding for the temple was sponsored by the Maharaja of Mysore. So there was a small bazaar, a marketplace there. So it had a secretariat, all of it. It was a complete settlement by itself.
Meanwhile, at the cellular jail, just a harbour away and in sight from the shores of the Ross Island, the inmates continued to wage their battle. Over the years, intellectuals and highly well-read revolutionaries were sent to Kalapani. The jail, though away from mainland India, could not wreak the fervour among the patriots. Several uprisings were witnessed inside the jail. And after a massive hunger strike by the inmates in 1930s, the British authorities relented and agreed to some of their demands. But as the struggle for independence picked pace, the plight of Indians in the cellular jail was aggressively pursued by the leaders in the mainland.
Those who went on strike, they are not ordinary convicts. I mean, these are the intellectuals, and they know their rights. Some of them have been lawyers, writers, editors. They know the condition in other jails. And so they wanted certain facilities, like in other jails, like I must get newspapers or books to read, or should be able to write letters back home, should not be given too much of corporal punishment. They knew their rights.
देखिए, स्ट्राइक तो उन्हीं यहाँ पे 1912 में भी हुई, लेकिन जो सबसे बड़ी जो स्ट्राइक थी, जो फाइनली अंग्रेज़ों ने 1936-37 में जो हुई ज़्यादा, उससे पहले भी एक 1933 में भी हुआ, जो जहाँ पर 3 लोग शहीद हुए, जब फोर्स हंगर स्ट्राइक थी, जब 3 देशभक्त जो थे हमारे शहीद हुए, महावीर सिंह जी, मोहित मित्रा जी और मन किशोर नामदास जी, ये तीनों उस ज़माने में उस फोर्स फीडिंग के दौरान शहीद हुए.
And finally, in the year 1938, the British government decided to close down the penal settlement, repatriating all the political prisoners of cellular jail to their respective states. While many political prisoners left for the mainland, some chose to stay back. The British Indian government had started allotting housing sites and land for cultivations to the convict under Andaman Nicobar Islands regulation scheme. And those who stayed back continued in their effort to carve a domestic dimension of this penal colony. It was also the time when the war clouds were again getting dense. World War II saw intense battle between the British and Japanese troops. As Japanese progressed in the Eastern Front, these islands were brought under the Japanese troops. Great Indian nationalist leader and the founder of Indian National Army, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose too visited the island and hoisted the flag of independent India after Japanese took control.
The Japanese were here from 42 to 45. First they came as kind of liberators, they thought of, Asian common prosperity sphere, things like that. And then people thought they would close down the penal colony, and it was handed over to Netaji on 30th December 1943. So initially it was thought these islands will be free from British rule.
These islands remained under Japanese control from March 1942 to October 1945. Though initially locals were happy with the ousting of British and gave Japanese a rousing welcome, the later Japanese period saw one of the eras of the worst tortures on the residents of islands.
The locals were happy about it, initial period. They used to welcome the Japanese. The sorties of the Japanese were welcomed. They used to throw cigarettes and things from the flight. And people were happy about it. And then finally the Britishers evacuate, the Japanese land here. The first day, everything is fine. But immediately the next day, there is an episode of assassination of one youngster called Sunny. Zulfukaruddin, his name was. He was killed by the Japanese because of some reason, like he did something and they didn't like, and they wanted to teach a lesson to all that we are not going to tolerate all this. And they assassinated him. He was killed by the Japanese, and the mass was gathered around to see all that. And that created the fear amongst the locals.
It is remembered as a reign of terror. Many people were slaughtered. Many people were killed on suspicion of being British spies. Many people were killed for no reason at all. So, and there was starvation everywhere, there was disease everywhere. It is a terrible memory for many of the people. There are still some survivors here who speak about it with horror.
The Japanese occupation also witnessed fierce guerrilla battles between the local tribes and Japanese forces. As Japanese and the Axis forces faced certain defeat after the fall of Berlin, the British troops reoccupied Andaman Islands, pushing out the Japanese. And in 1947, with independence, the islands too were free of any occupation as they were attached to the Union of India.
When post-independence, Andaman and Nicobar becomes part of India. So the development of Andaman starts only from the second 5-year plan. First 5-year plan was just initial building of roads and all that. And the main development starts there. There was no political parties here. Local people had no idea about politics. There was no Congress party. Nothing was here. All we had was a local born association. That was the association of the local people that worked for the welfare of in connivance with the administration.
It was also the realization of the dreams of each and every freedom fighter who were lodged at the infamous Kalapani jail. A pilgrim place for the years to come, the building without whom the story of these islands will remain incomplete. The islands, however, came to its own after they were constituted into the Union Territory on 1st November 1956. The islands, however, came to its own after they were constituted into the Union Territory on 1st November 1956. As the Indian government started creating settlements here, and many refugee families from the then East Pakistan and Sri Lanka were given land, the islands became one of the most diverse parts of country, a mini India, so to say.
This also became land of opportunities. Jobs were available here. People were not that trained for many posts. So people from mainland India, laborers were not available. Laborers were imported from Tamil Nadu, then from Andhra. Trading started from Bengal, not from Chennai. Chennai part comes much later. So education system was from Rangoon, Burma earlier, then it changed to Calcutta University and then later to Central Board of CBSE.
I've been a very frequent visitor to the jail, and I am very happy to see that it has developed into, we got a library here, we got a curator here, we got staff working here, we get people coming here to make documentaries, we get the relatives or descendants of freedom fighters coming here every year, we have a reunion here, so many things are happening.
Today, these islands are one of the most wanted tourist spots in India and also a trove of India's rich flavors and cuisine, which could be seen in its cuisine and fast emerging chain of hotels and eateries. And one of the places where you can have choicest of cuisines from North Indian to South Indian to even Mediterranean and Thai is Anju Coco in Aberdeen Bazaar of Port Blair. Run by its patron Pradeep Jan Reja, who first came here in 2004 and started a restaurant business in Havelock Island, Anju Coco was forthcoming in inviting us to its kitchen and showing the finesse of its cuisine. One of them was shakshuka, a dish prepared with poached eggs, fried with onions, tomatoes, pepper, olives and other condiments available all over India. According to the restaurant owners here, the food culture came with the advent of tourism across the island. What was once a bazaar of just 2 or 3 eateries is now packed with several restaurants serving delectable cuisine from local to global. It's not just these restaurants in the main markets of Port Blair. There are also smaller shacks in Neil Islands and also in Havelock, which serves cuisine, or to say simple dish that can stir your palates.
You're watching the colors of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. We are here at the Neil Island. It's 2 hours away from an early morning ferry ride from Port Blair. Now once you land here at the Neil Islands jetty, what do? It's early morning, you're tired a little bit with the ferry ride, and of course you're hungry. Come here to these small shacks around the jetty. We are in one of those shacks here and they are making these sumptuous parathas. Now this is the speciality of the coastal areas, and that is what you see in a lot of shacks, like parathas and dosas and gram sabzis, sambar and chutneys. Especially coconut is an ideal ingredient in every snack here. So we are here with Rajendra ji. Rajendra ji, आप दिन में जो है कितना पराठे बनाते हैं ये?
दिन में यहाँ करके तो फेस्टिव किस तरह आता है वो हिसाब में बनाता है। दिन में भी 200-300 ही बनाता है।
अच्छा 200-300?
दिन में जितना कम भी हो जाता है।
अच्छा।
आप ये आने के हिसाब में बनाता है।
और इसमें जो है एक पराठा आप कितना सुबह सुबह स्टार्ट करते हैं बनाना?
हम 5 बजे शुरू करते हैं।
5 बजे। एक बार बताएंगे, दिखाएंगे ज़रा बना के कैसे बनता है ये। अभी आपने बनाया है ये, तो अब क्या करेंगे इसका?
इसका बना के तो बिजनेस करेंगे।
अभी कैसे ऐसे भी करते हैं इसको?
मारना है, इसको मारना था ना ये इसका।
अच्छा, एक मिनट। सो दिस इज अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग थिंग नाउ दे मेड अ पराठा एंड दे विल मेक इट एक्स्ट्रा क्रंची। Well, as all good things comes to an end, this also brings to an end of our special presentation on the history and culture of Port Blair and Andaman Nicobar Islands. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. Keep watching the Rajat TV for more on the history of Indian cities. Thank you.